Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 26th meeting of the school board for our committee meetings, Finance and Operations, and Education and People Services tonight. Before we start tonight, I just wanted to thank Dr. Rucci for his 8 years of service on the school board. I just want to thank you always for your mentorship. Since I joined the board, you've been here, so I appreciate all that you have shared with me and in the operations of the district and your perspective, and it was invaluable. You're going to be well missed. If anybody else has anything they'd like to say?
Yeah, I want to echo Madam President's sentiments, and as a fellow technologist, I can really appreciate the hard work you've set in and what your passion is. We share the same passion, so thank you for all the work you've done and the mentorship for me as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Ken, thank you for being so welcoming in 2017 and really being a leader in your own right with your experience on the board. So thank you so much.
I've known Dr. Rucci and his wife for like more than 15 years, and it was really an honor for me to be able to serve on this with you for these past 2 years. Again, I really appreciate your mentorship, your guidance. We settled many things over a few cigars and drinks, and those times won't end for us. But I really do appreciate the support over the past 2 years and all your years of service, and as well as your entire family to this board. So thanks a lot, Ken. Enjoy retirement.
I'd just like to echo everything everyone else said. I want to say thank you so much for all your years of service. You've always been there anytime I've asked you a question. You've always been there with a great answer and mentorship all along the way ever since we started on the board, so thank you.
You were welcoming as a new board member when I was a new board member in 2017, and I appreciate your mentoring.
We go way back to your kids going through the school district and being a huge support, both personally, and I made the comments previously at the last superintendent's report, but the folks that are here that didn't get a chance to hear that, you and your wife have been a part of the school district for many, many, many years, and just about every role, from a home and school person, obviously a parent, to a booster club, to an alum. I mean, you're a Royal through and through, and I just want to say that we're going to keep pushing forward, and all the positives and all the information and all the ideas that you helped put in place, we're going to carry that through. And I appreciate on a personal level the personal relationship, so I wanted to say thanks.
And I want to thank everyone for the kind words. It is a little bit bittersweet being the last meeting. I was just telling Monica I'm going to have to find something else to do on Tuesday nights. So, but anyway, one of the things that I really have enjoyed in serving on this board over all the years is that everybody that I've worked with has shared the same passion about the district. We have maybe differed in our views, but we were all there for the same time, and I appreciate the fact that we were able to work together for the best interest of the district. So thank you all for your kind words. I really do appreciate it, and I will. I hope to stay involved, just in a different capacity. So thank you again.
Mr. Rogers, how you doing this evening?
Doing well.
Good. Please begin with an overview of your agenda for this evening.
Tonight we have 4 agenda items. The first is a review of our annual audit report, which is informational, which will be moved to, requested to be approved at the next board meeting. Agenda item number 2 is the 2020-2021 budget, the preliminary budget versus accelerated opt-out, which will require board action. We will be reviewing the Act 1 timeline and the option of a preliminary budget versus the accelerated opt-out. Agenda item number 3, we will review capital improvements. This is both board action and informational. The board action portion would be moving forward capital projects over the course of the next year, in the next year, or the following year, which would include an issuance of bond. The informational side is just to discuss some of the future initiatives that we're pulling out for an idea for a vendor fair. Agenda item number 4 is informational. We're just going to discuss the future policies to be have first reading at the December meeting.
Okay, please begin with agenda item number 1.
Okay, that's me. Good evening. My name is Bill McGowan. I'm a partner with Baker Tilly, and we're the accounting firm that has performed the annual financial statement audit for the district for the period ending June 30th, 2019. And a draft of the district's financial statements was published last week, I believe. It is 70 pages long, so there'll be a quiz at the end of my presentation for those to see who read it and who didn't. But I'm just here to talk about some of the highlights and tell you what why it's 70 pages long. So the district is required to present financial statements both on a fund basis, and you're most familiar with the general fund, but other funds include the food service fund, which captures the cafeteria activity. There's also two capital project type funds. One, a capital reserve fund, where you transfer money from the general fund and use that only for capital improvements, and you've had that for a number of years. But this year, you also added a capital projects fund, and the source of the funds for that came from the two bond issues that you did, about $11.5 million that were at the end of the last fiscal year. So there's a number of fund financial statements, so the district must account for each of the funds separately. There's also what they refer to as a government-wide financial statement. The difference between the two is the general fund and these other funds are generally accounted for looking at short-term nature. So it's really only anything that's going to be cash or converted to cash within a year. The other one, the government-wide, includes any long-term assets and liabilities. So that would include any capital assets, okay, which aren't accounted for in the general fund. The long-term debt that including the ones that you just took on. But probably the biggest item is the PSERS pension and other post-employment liability. That was the district was required to recognize those two liabilities over the course of the last few years. And when you look at that financial statement, it shows that the district had a deficit of over almost $210 million. Now, $270 million of that deficit really relates to those two things, which are, very long-term. You have no control over that. That's all state-related. You just pay your 33.43% last year, or whatever it is this year, based on each payroll dollar. So what we typically say is focus on what you control, which is the general fund, the capital projects funds, et cetera. So there are financial statements in there with respect to that. There's also, at the beginning of the report, there is a management's discussion and analysis that was put together by Craig and his team that talks about the financial statements, how they're accounted for, and what are the various highlights and causes of differences from last year to this year, what are the trends, et cetera. So I would encourage you to read through that. It's about 20 pages. I'm not going to go through them in detail for brevity's sake, but those are the three main pieces. There's also probably 30 pages of footnotes that describe all of the details behind all the financial items. But our responsibility is to provide opinions on all of these items. So we provide an opinion on the government-wide financial statements. We provide opinions on the fund financial statements. And we also do some work with respect to federal funds that the district receives. So we are required to select a program each year and audit that program in accordance with the federal guidelines. So we did select the Child Nutrition Cluster, which is the school breakfast and lunch program. That had a big change this year in that it went to a community-wide program. And so we tested that. The results of that testing, we found no findings with the spending of the federal money. So there is a report at the tail end of this 70-page document that talks about the fact that our opinion with respect to your compliance with that was unmodified or clean opinion. With respect to the rest of the financial statements, our opinion runs a couple of pages long, but the gist of it is an unmodified opinion. That is a clean opinion. That means that the district's financial statements, as prepared by Craig and his team, are presented in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So that is the highest form of assurance that we can provide. If As far as whether there were any findings related to the financial statement audit, there were none. Everything went very well. In fact, with Craig taking over for Pat Grant over the course of the summer, we were always concerned about transition. It went extremely well. In fact, we're sitting here probably a week earlier than we have in the past. So, my congratulations to Craig and his team for getting all the work done and allowing us to be presenting this to you this evening. So again, it's a big document. The district, you can read through it. Again, at the end of the day, look at it. You make your determinations of where you're going with this. I would encourage you to read the MD&A. I would encourage you to look at the general fund budget to actual statement that's in there. Compares the budgeted number from a year ago to, that you said at the beginning of the year to what actually happened. And then the MD&A explains why the differences, the variances occurred. So, with that, I will throw it out to the committee as to whether or not they have any questions, or Craig has any questions.
Thank you, and Craig, you, Marvin, a lot of turnover this past summer. I know Wendy, who puts a lot of time and effort. That was a big substantial change that this board pushed forward with the new feeding of all the students in the school district. So compliments to the board for that, and to Wendy and to your team, Ed Marshallak and Marvin Lee, who's new as well. The amount of time and effort I know that you put into making sure we are where we are, I appreciate that. It's a lot of work, and I just want to say thank you for that, for the clean audit.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that thank you. It looks like we got the highest possible opinion, which is great, and we're a week early, so kudos to you, Craig, and all your work with your team, and thank you for your opinion. All right, thank you. You can go on to agenda item 2. Thank you for that.
So next up, we have the 2020-2021 budget, preliminary budget versus the accelerated opt-out. And this, again, will require board action. So tonight, we're going to discuss, and this is somewhat similar to our presentation last month, just getting the idea out there, the Act 1 timeline again. And tonight, as presented last meeting, is the first decision really to be made by the board. So we're going to review a couple things. So the overview shows that we're going to discuss what we know at this point. So we'll discuss the Act 1 information that we're aware of. We'll talk about Upper Darby historically and how the Act 1 has affected the district, as well as locally. How's that affect Delaware County schools? And then finally, we'll come to a slide to discuss the timeline again and what your decision tonight will indicate for the timeline moving forward for this budget. So first up is what we know for Act 1 information. We don't know much at this point. They've set the Act 1 base index at 2.6%, which we discussed at the last meeting. And then since then, they've released the adjusted index, which for Upper Darby this year is 3.8%. And just as a little overview for the adjusted index versus base index, it really comes down to poverty level and an aid ratio. So each district's adjusted index is not the same. So there are districts that have the same. They may have base index. If their poverty levels are at a certain point and their aid ratio is low enough, their adjusted index may just be base index. So as we move through these slides, you'll see that in some of the information we're going to discuss tonight. But in all reality, at this point in the budget process, this is all we know. We don't know what state funding will be next year, federal funding, some of the major sources that we can dictate. The biggest one that the board has control over is the tax rate, which obviously dictates your local revenue sources. So all that being said, it's a bare slide at this point. So next up, we'll talk historically. So this slide presents Upper Darby. In the yellow, you'll see what the actual increase has been in taxes over the past 6 years. Right below that is the base index and then the adjusted index. And then underneath, you'll see a graph just representing that. So again, the purple bar in each year is what the taxes were actually increased in Upper Darby. The gray would be your base index, and the gold is your adjusted index. So for example, in 2014-15, Upper Darby increased taxes 2.3%. The base index was 2.1, and the adjusted was 2.9. So in a more graphic sense, if you look at that below and compare the purple to the gray and the gold, you can see each year the district has not gone above the adjusted index, which would require a preliminary budget and also referendum to go above that index. And you'll see that we're typically right floating around the base index in the past 6 years. So I'll just leave that for a sec so you can kind of take it in. And again, well, I haven't mentioned it, but over the past 6 years, our average increase in Upper Darby is 1.9%. And the adjusted index comes in just about 2.3, 2.4%. So next, this graph is actually the actual tax increase for each district over the past 6 years in the county. So obviously ours here is highlighted in yellow, and it is sorted on average, lowest to highest. So you'll see Upper Darby over the past 6 years has increased taxes the 5th least in the county. And again, that 1.9 that I had referenced is the second from the right, and you'll see the title, 6-year average, actual tax increase at 1.9. So again, over the past 6 years, an average of 1.9% tax increase. The column all the way to the left is the averages of the adjusted index. So you'll see the 3.2, that is not what we increased it by, it was the 1.9 average.
I think it's important as we look to this graph and information, and there's another graph I think that Craig will have next, to the earlier slide that talks about a base index or an adjusted index. Again, the problem in Delaware County and the problem in public education is that we should not be pitted against one another school districts, as you can see in this graph. So the presentation tonight is not to say, hey, we're better than somebody else, or we kept our taxes lower than somebody else. We know that this community can only afford so much. And the other communities, too, they can only tax so much because they can only go to a certain index, and as a result, they have to go to that number, that higher number each time, because they do not get the other kind of resources maybe that some do. So that comes into play, and we're obviously here to talk about Upper Darby School District. We're not trying to compete this way against anyone else. The reality in Delaware County is a lot of the school districts are relying too much on local taxation to fund its schools, and that's what Craig is presenting here, that if you look at all this information, most of Delaware County school districts are really relying on the taxpayers to fund education, and the state and federal government are not coming up nearly to where they need to make this happen. So it's another example of fair funding is very much needed, not just for Upper Darby, but for all the schools in Delaware County.
So this graph is a depiction of the previous information that you saw. And in this case, the purple again is the actual increase, the average, the 6-year average of the actual increase for each school. And again, the 6-year average of the adjusted index. So just to paint the picture of over the past 6 years in a comparative purpose, where does Upper Darby land as far as how close are we getting to the adjusted index? And to Dan's point, when you think about that, your base index is set by the state, and it can go up based on poverty level. So it doesn't make much sense that you as a district who has a higher aid ratio has the ability to tax a community that's considered in poverty more than a district that is not.
And the graph again shows as you go to the right, in some of those school districts that, we won't name them by name, you can see it speaks for itself. They have to either ask for exceptions for either PSERS or special education because they do not have an adjusted index that's higher. So they have to go out for those exceptions in those areas just to make that budget balanced without cutting programs, even in those communities. As a result, their tax increase may be higher than some other school districts because their base index is as high as they can go, and then they have to seek those exceptions that are in place. And I think it's well done, Craig pointing this out.
So now that we've gone through what we really know, the history, and also explained some of the issues with the tax increases and so on and so forth, this is now really what it comes down to. Tonight we want to ask the board to make a decision whether we go down the path of a preliminary budget, which would create a different timeline. It also allows you to go out for referendum above the adjusted index, or go with an opt-out resolution, which is saying that the district will not be allowed to go above the adjusted index. doesn't say that we're going to go to the adjusted index. You just cannot go above it. So here we've broken out the dates, and you'll see that the first step in both of those is December 3rd, the board meeting. We're going to need the board to adopt one of two resolutions, either an opt-out resolution authorizing, or adopt a resolution authorizing the proposed preliminary budget display and advertisement, or adopt an accelerated opt-out resolution. And then that dictates the rest of the timeline. What I'd also like to say is just because you don't do a preliminary budget does not mean you cannot present more than what's here. So under the opt-out resolution, you have two major deadlines to hit. You have to present or adopt a proposed final budget and an actual final budget. Within those are built-in steps where we present in a committee meeting. So you'll see the May 12th approval or adoption of the proposed final budget. We would publicly present at the April committee meeting. So you have naturally built in a minimum of 2 presentations on the budget. If the board had wished, you could build in other presentations in any way you'd like. The big difference with the preliminary is they dictate the timeline for which you need to create those budgets.
To me, this is the educational side of the house and the business side of the house trying to find a compromise, simply because the history of the district. Before recent changes in public schools code and how things are handled, school districts were put into a situation where they had to cut programming to balance budgets because you could not do a furlough program. You had to have a curtailment of programs. Those rules have changed. What we've also learned from in the past is you don't want to be in front of a board or the public in April when we get more information. We have to learn from the past and say, oh my gosh, it's April or something, and oh, guess what? The feds have cut this money or the state is not giving this money, and now we're in front of this board in April saying, you know, we have to figure out what to do here, and we can only tax so much, and we may have to look at our programming. So what the compromise in this would be, that I've had a conversation with Craig, would be, regardless of which solution the board chooses, most business managers and we would say that the opt-out makes sense because our community can't afford a higher tax rate, that we still are keeping you informed and the public informed about what the needs are of the district and what's going on, so that there wouldn't be surprises leading up to an adoption of a budget. Where years and years and years ago, it was like, here's the budget, here's what we have, too bad. We want to avoid any kind of conversations that exist like that. So in either one of these, the district would still be providing information and ability for the public and the board to digest what's going on with the needs of the district and the budget. On the left-hand side, the preliminary budget, the issue there is you could come out with some staggering tax increase that often is covered in the newspaper, which we would not clearly go out with that high of a tax increase by the time we adopt the budget.
So are there any questions?
So if I'm understanding correctly, with the opt-out option, those are the minimum, like, control gates or timelines that we have to adhere to, but based on what you said, we can add others to brief the
Yes.
public on the different options. So we're not losing anything if we do that. We just give the public the assurance that we're not going to come back to them with this number that's high above the adjusted index. Is that correct?
Yes, if you were to choose an opt-out resolution, you are mandated to not go above the adjusted index, meaning the highest the tax could be is 3.8 in this given year, which is the second highest since the Act 1 has been implemented. The first year was implemented, it was 4% in 2010-11. So this is the highest it's been for the district. But to your point, those are state mandated. Now, they are adjusted to our schedule, so the real timeline is the absolute latest you could approve a budget's June 30th, and then you have to back up 10, 20, and 30 days based on the advertisement and the adopted proposed budget. But to fit within our committee and board meetings without having to have special meetings,
16.
and also to have enough time for our taxes system to be turned around and issue our tax bills in a timely fashion by July 1st, there are the dates that fit within the board schedule.
The referendum you mentioned, could you just remind me when that is required?
Should
You
they know
want the
reason-
actual date, correct?
Well, no.
Under the circumstances.
Oh, why? I thought you said when. I was going to pull the exact date.
That's
for
what I
you.
thought he meant. I was going to get
The
clarity.
circumstances would be, if you were going to bounce your budget and you really only have a few options. You can increase taxes, you can use your fund balance, or you can ask for referendum exemptions. So in our situation, we've chosen to use our fund balance to bounce the budget, knowing that there's a gap with where our budget to actual is for various reasons within the district, which is based on historical knowledge. Again, we would get into those conversations during the budget presentations, but we've been confident in bouncing our budget the way we have in the past without going to, or even asking to go to referendum.
Okay, thank you.
Do we qualify for exceptions?
I have not done the calculations for this given year. I know last year we were very close, that special ed, we're just over to qualify, and PSERS, we did not.
When will you know that?
Once we start building out the numbers and doing some projections, right now our main focus was completing the audit, and now we'll roll right into the budget season.
But we would need to know that before we made the decision, wouldn't we? If we qualified for exceptions, if the board was concerned about raising enough money.
You can go to, just because you go to a preliminary budget does not mean you're going to use or even file for referendum exemptions. It's not a guarantee. It just gives you the option. Once you do the opt-out resolution, there is no more option to put in for the referendums.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have the capital improvements, which will be presented by Mr. Craig Harnachek, Tim Leaf, and Marvin Lee.
This is the reformatting of the capital program for 2020. We identified a series of problems with last year's evaluation and went to correct those problems where we could find them. The analysis that was done by the prior consultant seemed to be skewed towards the Drexel Hill facility. We need to look beyond that. For whatever reason, I can't speak to that. But moving forward, we're going to look at a district-wide solution in the capital program for both 2020 and then the years following on. The analysis, the way it was set up previously, and I'm speaking about a spreadsheet for future analysis that you're obviously not seeing here, but didn't have continuity across each one of the properties. It was hard to level dollars spent versus tasks completed. We've gone ahead and leveled all of that to 114 different tasks instead of, I think, the 38 that were originally listed. So we have a much wider range of work scopes to choose from and projects assignments that we can make going forward. The financial analysis in the prior report seems to have been artificially inflated. Maybe it was just due to a lack of using current dollar values. I can't, again, speak to that because it was prior to my time here. But what we're going to do now is use actual cost data, which will allow us to pinpoint the numbers much closer to actual spends, so that instead of cutting back our program due to a budget overshoot, we'll be closer to what our real spend is and possibly fold in additional projects that we might have overlooked just due to capital limitations. These are the solutions, and this again is speaking to the formatting system that we've established now. Balance, life cycle and warranty information, trending, categorization, and budget. Each one of these categories is addressed in our new formatting system. I can speak directly to the life cycle and warranty issues. We didn't actually track things as effectively as we could in the past. Going forward, we're going to be able to tell, going into the end of a piece of equipment's lifespan, and project out that value at that point in time if it's 10, 20 years down the road using averaging cost data for escalation. Trending, this is something new that we're doing. What Marvin did was send out a solicitation to all the principals throughout the entire district and asked them what their wish list was. Tim sat down and reviewed all those wish list priorities and reassigned the priorities to things that could be directly moved to the requisition things that we would absorb in the capital project immediately, and then items that would be furloughed to later on in the queue for capital programming. This allows us to see exactly where the district seems to be moving in terms of educators' wants and needs, and allows us to do future projections, and also turn our capital program to address those needs and wants. Budget. Escalation, as I said earlier, we can look at any replacement project anywhere in the timeline to determine what the actual dollar spend would be at some future date. So we can project out several years in advance, or as short as 1 or 2. The goals, scheduling. We want to revamp our current scheduling process so we come to you earlier on in possibly a month or 2 back, because we're a little bit behind the curve so far as getting projects out to bid and limiting the market share that we try to reach out to. If we broaden our base of contractors that we're looking at, consultants that we're looking at, we'll probably reduce our costs. And at the same time, not be curtailed to the point where we're rushing through design, where we could possibly pick up mistakes that might generate change orders in the field. Marvin, do you want to speak to the diversity factor?
So one of the goals is to increase our diversity with the MBE and WBE vendors. Because we are spending millions of dollars to improve our schools through our contractors, we wanted to let the vendor community know that we are open for biddings. So our procurement services has been, our Office of Procurement Services has been planning a vendor fair to have an opportunity to meet and greet new vendors that are, especially they are local and woman-owned and minority-owned vendors. So at the vendor fair, we're going to be discussing the contracts that are available, how to become our vendors, and how to submit their proposal through the public bidding process. And we're going to also talk about the responsible contractor AR for big contracts. To maximize the participation, we're going to be reaching out to the various chambers of commerce, and we're going to be also doing the online search, phone books, and the trade magazine. And just wanted to shout out to Mr. McGilvery because he's been very active on reaching out to various vendors. Thank you, Joe. The Abu Dhabi School District Vendor Fair is tentatively scheduled on January 17th, 2020.
In addition to that, we're going to be reaching out to more minority consultants and more minority contractors going forward. Under the design services, we've seen that your spends for design consulting services are a little bit on the high side. We'd like to try to reduce them back down to what industry levels are in the area, and we have a very good leads on that. We also are going to take some of the design projects that are very small and are easily handled, and both Tim and myself will be doing the construction administration on those and cutting out the middleman for those projects where we can actually effectively manage those. And then to the consultants again, if we expand the pool, we're going to pay lower fees overall. This is that wish list that we talked about earlier, where Tim and Marvin worked together to evaluate the priorities. We received 66 items, 43 were moved to the requisition program, 2 were folded into this year's capital program, and then the remaining 21 were placed in the future capital program queue. This is our 2020 capital improvement program. A large share of the items are liability issues. Paving, sidewalk replacement. We have 7 paving projects and 5 sidewalk projects. Again, liability, a large factor here. Second items are securing the school, so far as roofs, windows, doors, things like that. We have the balance of the window project for Beverly Hills, and new PA systems, striping of parking lots, some roofing and fencing work, and then a small swing set replacement at the Gariford School. Our project spend for next year is $5 million. That's the project listing for everything that we've targeted. And then this year's spend was $10.3 million. A large item of that, obviously, was the new field restoration, or replacement, rather. These are the trends that we identified in the outreach to the educators: toilet room modernization, air conditioning, and paving. Air conditioning has to deal with both our current air conditioning levels and the expansion of air conditioning, as you're well aware of. We still have a number of facilities that are heating only, that a lot of the educators would like to see, and as studies have shown, helps in the educational process. Toilet room modernizations. This is really a huge benefit. Everyone uses the bathrooms every single day. And in Philadelphia, we found that this was one of the most beneficial, positive programs that we implemented. Paving, obviously a liability issue, and we've got several locations, as the earlier slide showed, to address throughout the district. One other item that the prior evaluation did not key off of: institutional knowledge. By having an outside consultant do these selections, do this evaluation, he completely missed the institutional knowledge that we have with our people, specifically Tim. With years of service here at the district, that institutional knowledge will be folded into the entire capital program selection. That helps us not only to prioritize, but to make the selections moving forward. And I can't overstress just how critical that is. Any questions?
I do have a question on your solutions
Yes.
chart, if you can go back to that. You talked about each of these, you skipped over categorization because you went to another slide. Does that, it says work types are broken down to identify projects with high visibility.
Yes.
Does that allude to priority and criticality? You're saying high
No.
visibility.
What it will do is there's work groups. So any type of work on the exterior of the building versus interior of the building versus grounds-related projects. We have all those subcategories broken out amongst the 114 different types of work groups.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you. I know this had to be a lot of work put into reorganizing this priorities and projections, and I love the way it's organized. It's really easy to understand where we are and where we're going and what the goals are with each building. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Wait till you see the spreadsheet.
Oh, I know. I have it. I've been looking at it.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to add, also, this $5 million falls right into our plan of issuing bond issuance with all the capital improvements. So while these are just totaling $5 million, or not just, it's a large number, especially with what we've done over the past couple of years. I'd like to at least let you know, as in every other year, there's always money that's budgeted into the general fund budget to address what Craig at one point referenced as requisition items that fall through the maintenance budget. So these are really high-tier, high-dollar items that aren't being picked up in a general year.
I did want to clarify just something that you said about the design services. I know that right now we have several different architects that are working with the district. So I'm assuming you've identified where the problems might be lying, what we could do better. I know that we did issue RFPs, and we are working with, I think, 3 different firms and a holdover firm. So I just wanted to clarify that the design services portion about the concerns with that.
Our concern primarily, or my concern, has to do with the quality of work. Moving forward, we'll do evaluations, send out a general RFP for various firms, try to increase our minority base as well. In addition to that, though, we really need to do a better job on the fees, and I think there's room for improvement there as well.
also to that point, we had planned, and Marvin and Craig had brought forward the idea, and Dan and I had spoke about putting out an RFQ, or request for quote, for engineering and architecture services so that we can have those in our back pocket and try and widen our horizon with how many vendors we have access to. And Craig has a great working knowledge of the industry due to his career.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much for a very informative presentation on capital improvements.
Thank you.
I believe you have one more agenda item, right?
Yes.
Mr.
So
Rogers?
the final agenda is for future, policies for future consideration for first reading at the December board meeting. At this point, those policies are 705, facilities and workplace safety, 709, building security, 805, emergency preparedness, 805.1, relations with law enforcement agencies, 805.2, school security personnel. And I'd just like to point out that we're really just bringing this up as a public service announcement to some degree, that these are going to a first reading at the next board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add that through our work on the policies, anytime there's a number of policies that come through, especially related to safety, security, giving advance notice so that there's enough public, knowledge ahead of time when they come up for a first reading. Our hope is that these are ready for a first reading in December. If that changes, we'll definitely do an announcement on that. But in working with Mr. Desnoyers, these policies in particular, and if he wants to comment, he certainly will, but these policies in particular are related to the state's changes in requirements for trauma-informed care training among staff, personnel, our security team, the requirements of Act 44, the NASRO training that our school security officers have to go through, how we handle emergency preparedness and the new rules and laws that have changed as a result of that. And also for the workplace safety, the recommendation is to have our school security director on that team coordinating school security and workplace safety, not just the school safety team that we have, but also the day-to-day building safety and security. So a lot of these changes do relate to our safety and our professional development of those who work with us. So we want to make sure that we're giving advance notice to those policies as they come forward.
Yeah, so as Dr. McGarry stated, the PSBA, Pennsylvania School Boards Association, of which many school board members and superintendents across the state are members, publishes model policies, which they distribute to school districts. These model policies are referred to as policy guides, and so the changes we're making to the policies listed tonight most overwhelmingly are changes recommended to adapt to changes in underlying laws. So we have been trying to let the community know whether changes are driven by external forces or whether policy changes are originate internally. And for the policies listed tonight, the changes overwhelmingly are have been recommended to us externally by the PSBA.
Yeah, which four are recommended by PSBA?
The four policies that we've listed that will be up for revision: Policy 705, Facilities and Workplace Safety; Policy 709, Building Security; Policy 805, Emergency Preparedness; and Policy 805.1 are the changes that will be, the revisions that will be on the agenda for next week's board meeting are all recommended changes from PSBA. They didn't originate internally.
What about Policy 805.2, school security personnel?
805.2 is new, but that's also, that's a new model policy. So it's essentially, it's not a policy that our school district developed. it's external, and it's driven by changes in the underlying law.
Right. That policy really is a policy that asks school districts to dictate what kind of school security they have, and it's a new policy put in place, it lists different forms to school police, school resource officers, school security, and then in the policy dictates what kind of services and training has to happen as a result. We have school security, we do not have school police, school resource officers, so that our policy will reflect, even though it's a brand-new policy, this type of training that's required and the type of school security that we have in place.
If anyone would like, I did prepare a summary of the changes that will be put on the agenda for next week. I can read that. It is fairly lengthy, though, so.
Yeah, I don't think you need to read it tonight.
Okay.
We're being moved forward for a first reading, so we'll have time to read that. Thank you.
And we can try to put summaries like this out in the future when we make these announcements.
I think that'll be helpful.
Okay.
Good suggestion. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, I think we're at the time now for public comments. If you have public comments, please come up to the microphone and state the agenda item that you have a comment about and your name and address. No public comments? Okay. Mr. Rogers, would you please review the agenda items presented this evening?
The first agenda item was the 2018-2019 Annual Audit Report, presentation and summary by Bill McGowan from Baker Tilly. This is an informational presentation, although there will be a resolution at the next board meeting for the approval of the financials. The second agenda item was the 2020-2021 budget, the preliminary budget versus the accelerated opt-out, which will require board action to move one or the other resolution forward to the next week's meeting.
So what do we want to do as a board? Which option? Do we want to pull?
Our recommendation was to move forward with the accelerated opt-out, not to exceed the index, and we're asking permission to move that forward.
Okay. Is everyone okay with the opt-out, accelerated opt-out option? Yes. Okay.
The third agenda item was capital improvements, which again was board action, and also the informational side was discussing the vendor fair that's coming up in January. The board action would be to move forward the projects listed under the 5 million so that we can start getting out there, try to get out for bids, RFPs, and also start exploring the financing options as we move forward with the potential issuance of the bond.
Understood. Is everyone okay with us moving those projects forward? Yes. Yes.
And the fourth was informational on the future policies for consideration.
Thank you very much. A motion is in order for adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting.
So moved.
Adjourned.